Hello, everyone, and welcome to Disability Dish, the UML Perspective. This is episode 6. My name is Janelle Diaz. I am an Assistant Director in Disability Services, and I'm co-hosting with...
Hi, everybody. Jodi Rachens, Director of Disability Services.
Awesome. We're so excited to have you all here. I'm going to have Jodi talk a little bit about our initiative.
So one major initiative for the Disability Services offices is really just to find ways to openly and actively discuss how we can support our fellow disability community members, whether in the university, outside networks, or in our everyday lives. It's important and impactful to make a major effort to reduce stigma and shame around disability. We want to flip the script to highlight the uncountable strengths that can show through various disabilities. So among many initiatives that we are putting out through our office, this monthly podcast just provides representation and discussion around various interesting topics on disability.
And just a little disclaimer, this is just a discussion about our thoughts and opinions and perspectives on the episode topic. So we're going to kind of get right into things. Today's topic is the field of disability services, and we have some wonderful UML experts here, our disability services team. I'm going to have each of you state your name, role at the university, and your relationship with the word disability, if you feel like you have one. And anyone can start.
I suppose I'll start. So my name is Brandon Drake. I'm the Associate Director for Disability Services and the Manager for Assistive Technology. And my relationship with disability would mainly be an ally.
I can go next. I'm Lauren Tornatore. I'm an assistant director here in Disability Services. I would say my relationship with the word disability, I've tended to use it just to help other people understand what it is that I do in my career and kind of the people that I work with. So I would say that that's really it for my relationship with that word.
Awesome.
We also have a special guest with us, our beloved administrative assistant, Aida Phillips, who is here as a listener and observer and a cheerer from behind the scenes. So she's here with us. Thank you, Aida.
Awesome. So if someone can start by telling us about your experience prior to entering the field of disability services, and if you saw yourself as being a disability service staff member from the start.
No particular order, just kind of go for it.
I would say for me, it was, so my background is in psychology. So when I was in school in psychology, at first everybody kind of makes it sound like you're going to be a doctor and you're going to meet with everybody one-on-one and talk about their feelings and that kind of thing. And so when I was first, in undergrad, I thought that was going to be my path. And actually, because I went to a really small school, I went to Merrimack for undergrad. It was really hard to get into grad school. I had the grades, but I didn't have like the name recognition or the research background that people were asking for to like get into a PhD program. So my parents had moved to Connecticut at the time, and I moved down there because I didn't have enough money to live on my own. And they had there was a master's program at Southern Connecticut State University. And when I went into that master's program, my intention was just to prove to larger programs that I could do grad school level work. And so as I was doing that, I started taking classes, and I was also, I found a job at Haskins Laboratories, which is a research laboratory focusing on speech and language. And through those two things, I ended up, I really liked the field of assessment in terms of like kind of figuring out how someone else's mind works and then how to intervene. And so when I was doing that work, I was like, oh, I really like this. Well, how do I do this as a psychologist? I didn't really understand. And I happened to take a class. I had an elective that someone had suggested that was like a basics of school psychology. And I was taking it with two people who practiced in the field and then taught at night. And that's kind of how I fell into it, was really with that. It was just kind of like, oh, this sounds cool. And it meant that I had to go to grad school all over again. So I went twice in a row, which most people don't do that because, you know, it kind of seems a little silly to do that. But that's kind of how I got on that path was, you know, when I was working in research, I thought it was really interesting, but I felt really uncomfortable with the families that were coming in. I was doing research both in the areas of dyslexia as well as kids who had autism. And this was really early when, like, you know, those things weren't really being recognized by schools much. And although I thought it was really cool to work with those students and families, the part that made me uncomfortable was that I was just collecting a bunch of data and publishing it really for myself. There wasn't a whole lot of like practical application of what we were doing because we were doing it like so early on. So when I kind of got into school psychology, I figured out, oh, this is a really good way where I can take data and figure out how their brain works and what it is that they need and how to take that and apply it immediately to a school setting so that someone could feel a little more successful in that setting. So that's kind of how I fell into the field, like a short version of that.
Love it. Awesome.
And I'm kind of similar. So my focus before getting into the disability field was technology management. So I wasn't 100% positive what I wanted to do with it when I was getting into college, but as I learned more and more, it's funny. I know it sounds boring, but I was always really interested in like supply chain logistics, and I always kind of pictured myself working in a warehouse with a bunch of boxes and streamlining work processes and, you know, using technology to do that. And this was like before like Amazon really exploded with their enormous warehouses.
Amazon took your idea.
I know, right? Exactly. If I only knew. But yeah, so that was what I went to school for. But while I was at school, in my grad work, I applied for a position for an assistive technology assistant in the Disability Services office at our school. And at the time, I didn't know anything about the field, and very few schools even had that position full time as someone that focused on assistive technology. So it was a bit bizarre because there was a lot of students that really needed it, and they didn't really have any professional person that had a really great understanding of it. So it was basically, they were looking for a person that liked technology, that was willing to learn new things, and wanted to problem solve. And that's what a lot of it was. And it got me very, very interested in the field because I got to work one-on-one with students who had difficulties accessing their school that I had no idea that they were even going through until I met with them, and then coming up with solutions on how to get them access. So it was really kind of a blessing to fall into that, because it wasn't something I was looking for. It's something that kind of found me. So a lot of my career from there has just been training and learning and figuring out the different changes that are happening in the field. I bounced around a couple different schools doing this kind of work, and I've been at UMass Lowell for about 6 years now doing it.
7. I know Lauren's got a signal for 7, and I was about to correct you too, because
7 years.
Have been using the word 6, but it's
the time flies. Yes.
Janelle, why don't you share your story? I think you and I should share our stories too.
Yeah. So I'm actually a double river hawk for UMass Lowell. And so in my graduate program, or while I was going to grad school, I actually did a couple of different positions in the nonprofit area. So I worked for a nonprofit called Northeast Independent Living Program, where I actually was a facilitator in their transition to adulthood program, where it basically provided employment for kids transitioning out of high school into like either college or just like the workforce. And I support them in finding, and these are students with disabilities, sorry, just for disclosure. And I provide them the different placements as to where they had the employment opportunities in the summer. So I did that, and then I did some therapeutic mentoring for a nonprofit in Everett. So I always kind of liked being in kind of like the social services world of things. And as I was graduating, there was an opening as a counselor in disability services part-time. And I applied and I got the position. I started off in psychology though, and I did community social psychology for my grad program, which is basically looking at nonprofits and the services that they are providing and trying to tailor them to the people they're serving. So I kind of also fell into this position to some extent, although I did have experience of working with people with disabilities prior. But yeah, so I've been here for, so if y'all have been here for 7 years, I've been here for 8.
Mm-hmm. So, you know, the theme kind of presents itself as for most of us, a lot of us didn't have an intentional path to get to the roles that we have, and I am the same way. I do think there's some really neat stuff right now for students who are in higher education and are pursuing graduate careers where they can actually intentionally seek jobs in disability services among higher ed. So that's been a really neat development. But for myself, it's pretty similar to with Lauren. I was a psychology major at the University of Maryland. And they are a very researchy institution too, and they wanted everybody to have a PhD in order to do anything in life. So I thought that was an institution. I wanted to be a marriage and family therapist. And right after college, I moved up to Boston, and I was working in group homes with teens that were in state custody, a girls group home and a boys group home. And I was applying for PhD programs in marriage and family. And the only one that I got into at the time was in Indiana, and I couldn't figure out how to move to Indiana with sort of the circumstances of my life as they were. And so I decided to stay in Massachusetts, and then I was like, I got to figure out what to do then in that case. And so I reflected a little bit and had found that with the group homes that I work at in the teens, like the relationships with the teens I'd really gravitated to were those that also had a learning disability or an autism spectrum or ADHD, and, were struggling through GEDs or things like that. And I came across a position at Lesley University to work with students with moderate to severe learning disabilities in a college experience program, not a degree seeking program. And it also would have provided me the opportunity to get a master's degree. And so I took that, and I still was going to be a marriage and family therapist, just a master's level one. So I got my master's in professional counseling. And after that, I did continue with disability. So I was like, okay, I'm going to be a counselor with disabilities. That's what I'm going to do. So I did school counseling for a little while at a high school for kiddos with learning disabilities. And I did some clinic and private practice therapy work, and usually was seeking clients that had some type of disability. I was not a very good private practice business owner, so I hated asking people for money directly. And so that was just not working well for me. And, I kept finding myself really wanting to be back with students who were developing their own voices and transitioning for the first time to adulthood. And I really liked working with the seniors at the high school that I worked at, and helping them sort of start to have those conversations. And so I decided I really wanted to get back into higher education. And so I feel like I finally found what my true work and passion was at that point, and have worked at a couple of institutions, and have worked in higher ed disabilities, and this is where I am. So it's been, I do finally feel like all the things found their way to synthesize into something that really makes sense for me. So that's been my journey. And I've been here not quite 1 year, only here since November. Okay, so we're gonna move on to our next question. The next questions won't all take as long as the first question did. But so in terms of the fact that we have a disability services office and that we're a disability services provider, what do folks feel that is really the importance of our role, either in a university or a community setting? Why are there disability service providers out there? I know it's weird. Somebody just go.
So I'll jump in, sure. So I mean, obviously, we kind of have that core important role of giving access to our students academically so they can participate in the class as well as anybody else. But it definitely goes beyond that for our office. So, you know, once we make sure we've got that buttoned down and we're meeting all the students' needs and following up with them throughout their time here, it's really important to weave this kind of service throughout the university. So it's not something that we want to be centralized to our office where any disability issue comes to us and we try to fix it. It's something that, you know, if a faculty member has a student with a disability and a problem comes up, they should be having some of the tools that they can to fix the problem on their own or address the issue. Same with staff. And then also doing things systemically that are going to try to eliminate some of those problems from even happening. So when we do have that extra time, focusing on those kind of things that are going to support students in other ways is such an important thing to do. And we try to do as much as we can.
Yeah, definitely. I would say I feel like I could speak to this on like the student end or like the receiving end of services. Just like in my personal experience, like I went to school or college in 2007. And back then, people didn't even want to have a conversation with me because my needs were so vast. And even though I had the grades, you know, I was top in my high school class. And I was going to get into whatever school I applied to, it's just most extent. And they still were like, nope, you can't talk to us until you are fully accepted, even though they understood that I had greater needs. So I think it's such crucial work because we are literally providing access to opportunities and greater opportunities. Allowing people to have access to education means that they will have greater access to other roles in life, right? And be able to be more independent and be more successful at the end of the day. And it just provides kind of equity inclusion, which is important in all aspects of the world. So I just feel like just being able to provide students the ability to have access to things that they should already have access to provides them even bigger opportunity for afterlife or after college life, not after after college life, not life.
Maybe afterlife, maybe it's all gone after life. Who knows?
After college life.
I would say beyond like the compliance and the aspect, you know, the access piece, you know, those are legal pieces of our job that like at base level, that's what we have to provide. To me, I think a larger role in our office is to really provide a safe space for students where they feel seen and heard as who they are, instead of having to cover up a part of themselves or to feel embarrassed about something. You know, I think that that's something that probably all of us have experienced, like behind closed doors, is, you know, students saying things like, well, you know, all my roommates get these papers done so much faster than me, and they, you know, and I don't understand why. And I'll say, well, you know, not all of them are struggling with their reading or struggling to get through, you know, and let's look at some technology or things that can help you with those things, you know, that comparison piece. And so You know, and I know all college students experience that in terms of feeling inadequate or, you know, feeling like they're comparing themselves to everyone else. But I do think that's like a big piece of our office that sometimes, you know, in that whole compliance thing gets overlooked, that like there's a person side to what we do too, in terms of helping people feel understood and not having to explain themselves, not having to explain everything in their life experience, or, you know, this is why I do this way, or this is why I think this way. You know, that for all of us, we have experience with various populations, and we just kind of like quote unquote get it, for lack of a better word. It doesn't mean that I'm perfect at understanding, but I think I do have the skill set. I'll speak for myself personally in terms of like asking questions or correcting myself or just meeting someone where they're at. You know, and not always focusing so much on grades. There's so much in college where we're focusing on like, you need to get this grade and you need to do this, you know, in order to get this degree in this fancy piece of paper. And that's important, but I think it's equally important to make sure that someone feels, you know, seen and heard and has a sense of belonging. You know, and especially when disability is such a large part of someone's identity, we're really able to do that. You know, and hopefully through larger work with the campus of kind of helping other people pick up the load in terms of universal design and acceptance, we can move where it's not just us, it can be a campus as a whole.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it sounds like I mean, I'm not surprised that we all sort of agree, but like, you know, that we, our role is sort of a voice of the people and sort of a mediator among all the various parties. We often will tell students, your job here is to be a student, and our job here is to kind of make sure that that's as smooth as can be, you know. And I think that people who work in the international students office will say a similar message, you know, students who, people who work in the multicultural office or the LGBTQ you know, center, you know, they're going to say the same thing. Your job is to be a student, and we're going to help kind of just like make sure that's as smooth as can be. So that's sort of, you know, our angle on that, whatever that means. I often feel like we also get to be sort of a soft and safe experience for students to kind of roll out this piece of their identity into what we say the real world is, like the working world and the job world, and sort of learn how to kind of navigate some stuff that may be bumpy and may not be easy, but also doesn't have kind of the protective bubble wrap that perhaps their childhood had or didn't have. You know, I think depends on the person, as Lauren was saying, and sort of what baggage they might be bringing, what everybody's sort of identity is. And so, yeah, I think, you know, we often say that our hope is that someday our job is obsolete and that everybody just understands how to work with all different types of people and all different types of students. And, you know, that's sort of the goal. But, you know, in that way, I think, you know, we just are right in there with that, you know, helping this, whoever our customer is, you know, get whatever their needs are, be the voice of them if they're not able to be. And as Lauren said, it is true that, you know, the core of our work has to be making sure that this institution upholds, you know, the laws and provides equitable access to so yeah.
Awesome. And so I feel like Lauren touched upon kind of the stigma, right, a little bit in terms of a student being able to feel like they can express who they are. But do you guys all feel like, what is your view on disability stigma, and how does being in the disability services office impact this? Also, has there been kind of any change over time, do you feel like? Because I know we all have been here, aside from Jodi, for quite some time. So have you seen kind of this work change?
I would say in terms of stigma, I feel like when I worked as a school psychologist in K through 12, I think it's kind of, for lack of a better word, more obvious when someone has a disability, because part of having services, unfortunately, is being pulled out of your primary classroom, you know, to experience something in a small group or one-on-one setting in order to help that student gain skills in an area. So I feel like a lot of times when students come here, you know, I usually joke with them that like, well, you're not going to leave the office with a tattoo on your forehead from me that says like, I have a disability. You know, and a lot of students really do fear that. They fear they're going to be singled out. They fear that other people are going to know and are going to think less of them because of that. So, you know, I do think that like the actual fear of stigma or being seen as less than, you know, is something that still exists. You know, I haven't seen in my lifetime a big social movement towards acceptance like we have seen with other marginalized groups, whether that's various groups, people of color, women, or people who are part of the LGBTQ plus community. So I am still kind of waiting for that to happen in terms of like just having a movement where, you know, having things be more acceptable, you know, things like including captions, things like using microphones, making sure that curb cutouts are there, and also having multiple ways for people to access a curriculum or something. And so, you know, I do think we kind of have a long way to go. In terms of here at the university, I feel like if I'm being honest, it kind of depends on the semester. You know, I'm not going to mention it here, but I would say there are certain departments that are easier to work with than others in terms of kind of seeing students with disabilities as a part of their classroom rather than an accommodation letter kind of be an extra thing that they have to do. You know, and I do understand that from the faculty side of kind of getting stressed about like, oh, am I doing the right thing? But what I would say overall is that, you know, we have had some success in terms of rolling out some different trainings for faculty and, you know, at least for us to be able to know who is an ally here on campus and kind of who's already on the cutting edge of providing some things that students need without them having to ask. So I think that's, you know, a positive thing. You know, that to me is moving in the right direction. You know, we did just get news that we're going to finally have more accessible buses here on campus. So like, that's a big thing. You know, so hopefully we can you know, and the construction that's happened on campus in terms of adding more elevators and things like that, I think those have been positive. And also even just little things like more of the use of Blackboard so that students who have executive functioning issues don't have to like chase down a paper syllabus that they lost, you know, the second day of classes that you can just re-download it again. So I think those things are things that are moving in the right direction. You know, but ultimately I always have like a pie in the sky. Like I'd love this to be in terms of disability inclusion. I would love to see a statement, you know, from the UMass system president about inclusion of students with disabilities and really having some larger system-wide things so that, you know, we can really get on the same page as a system in terms of what we're able to provide and who's welcome to all of our campuses.
I completely agree, Lauren. There's a lot of good work being done, but there is a lot more that could be done.
Always.
Yeah, in any setting, right?
Brandon, you're muted. You got nothing? Okay, Brandon feels like Lauren said it all.
I killed it. She crushed it.
Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's every time we have one of these podcasts, the topic has complexities with it, and this is a complex question and comes with like kind of a lot of different layers. I think, you know, having been in the field now for almost 2 decades and kind of seeing progression, I mean, I think what we are seeing more and more and more and more students access higher ed than they ever were before because things are going really positively. You know, the high school that I worked at after grad school actually was originally founded in the 70s for students with dyslexia because public schools didn't know how to work with kids with dyslexia. And they believed that kids with dyslexia, you know, it wasn't a matter of intelligence. It was a matter of sort of a different way of teaching and having different tools for them to access learning. And by the time I left, they had a complex proposition on their hands because in the last decade and more, public schools were like, we can do dyslexia, we got this, which was pretty cool. And so the private school had a different kind of set of concerns about who their population was, but public schools were like, that's no problem, ADHD, that's no problem, we can work with lots of students with lots of learning differences, and students who were blind and deaf would have had nothing to do with their intelligence to access higher education in the past, but they wouldn't have been able to access it because they just simply couldn't access the material, the physical material, and that's not an issue anymore, which is great. It involves people like us, and involves work, and involves communication and collaboration, but there's a lot more access, which is very cool. And so that part is great. So we have a higher level of students. I feel like there's a tiny movement of students who are now entering college that are like, yep, I have a disability and I want to talk about it. And I want people to know, and I don't care who doesn't know, and I want people to understand it and accept it. And I think that it's a really slow ooze of a shift, but it's a shift that like I feel like I'm latching on to, and I'm gonna try to like sort of pull apart and kind of I don't know, turn the volume up on it a little bit, because I think that in general, our overall way to support students and ways for students to feel welcome here and feel like they can be supported here by faculty, the staff, their peers, is for us to, I'm a broken record, but the reducing the stigma and making people feel like this is a totally fine place for you to be, and you can be who you are. And as Lauren said, a lot of other categories of sort of different identities, have had greater efforts to kind of work on that. Although I'm sure they would sit here and say that it's not even close to where they want it to be either. But I think that's what we can do, and then classes will be smoother, and learning will be smoother, and success towards graduation will be smoother, because everybody just has a better experience overall. So that's sort of what I'm seeing and hoping.
Yeah, definitely. So we all kind of talked about our time in disability services, but has there been anything that you feel like you have learned as a disability service provider?
Yeah, I mean, everything that I've learned as a disability service provider the last 10 years or so. But I mean,
specific, Brandon.
Specifically, sure. I would say, and that's true with a lot of fields, but there's just so few things that are really black and white in the disability world. I mean, like, a part of our roles is reading disability documentation before we even meet with a student, and it gives you a kind of a general idea of what might be going on in their classes and what they might struggle with and where their strengths might be. But you really don't understand until you meet the student, and you really, really don't understand until they've taken some college classes and they come back to you and let you know how it's gone. So just the follow-up, the constant progression through college, and meeting a student where they're at and supporting them where they're at, that is probably the biggest thing that I've learned, is that you're not going to be able to slap a solution on it the first day you meet somebody. It's really an evolving thing as a student goes, which it should be. That every student is going to progress differently through college, and they're going to learn new things, they're going to hit different challenges. So just being there as a support when it's needed.
Yeah. I always say that you can have the same disability, but your needs can be completely different. So
yeah, there's so much nature and nurture that can play into and just can play into how that package presents when somebody's in front of us.
I would say one thing that I learned coming back to higher ed, because I had worked at Mount Holyoke before coming here years ago, is when students were coming to me at first, like coming here to UMass Lowell, is I didn't realize how many students didn't really have a grasp of what their disability was. So, you know, and as somebody who worked in K through 12 and had students in high school where they were in the IEP meeting, they're in the 504 meeting, we're explaining those things to them. I think seeing that range of people who were kind of feeling lost, just feeling like, well, I feel like I'm struggling, or I feel like there's this challenge that other people don't have, and I don't understand what it is. And so that has been something that I've learned how to navigate over time in terms of like taking that information and helping that person understand what it means for them in their day-to-day life, like taking it out of what the testing is and what these numbers mean and those types of things, but having more of a casual conversation about, you know, well, this is what this documentation says, this is this doctor's opinion of you, but let's break it down in terms of like what you actually feel from your day-to-day life, and kind of using that to help a student be able to kind of grow into themselves as an adult, to then explain that to other people, because you know, there isn't a lot of information out there. And I think that sometimes students get really lost in trying to understand what the identity is, especially if they've been diagnosed later in life. You know, a disability is something that you can, you know, kind of come into at any point in your life. And so I think helping people understand that and navigate that was not something that I anticipated I would be doing when I took this job. And so kind of learning how to do that as I went along has been helpful.
Janelle, what about you? What have you learned?
I feel like I've learned to just be okay with students not always registering right away. I think that sometimes you just feel like, why wouldn't you register with us? We're here to help you. We're here to support you. But understanding that everyone accesses things in their own time and for different reasons. So I think I've just come to learn that, you know, it's okay. Like students will come to us when they feel like it's their time to come to us, and just trying to think of ways to ensure that students feel welcomed and accepted to the best of our abilities, and to feel like we are a resource and that we are a support to them.
I'm trying to think of what I've learned that is in addition to for me. I think I'll take it a little bit broader in that I think when we're working with someone who's resistant, and that could be a student, that could be a parent, that could be a faculty member or a staff member, somebody who's resistant. I have learned that if I approach it from the lens of, most people are intrinsically good people and want to do the right thing or do the good thing, but there's fear that sort of drives people and drives resistance. And if I remind myself of that, then that person isn't like a bad guy in my head, and that person isn't trying to be a bad guy or, you know, difficult or whatever, but that maybe they don't have the tools, or no one has really reassured them of what's going to be okay, or how that there's somebody that's going to be supporting them, or things like that. And that, you know, so it could be a student who's resistant to registering with us, or resistant to change, or talking to somebody about their disability. It could be, you know, a faculty member who's resistant to providing certain accommodations in the classroom that would be really helpful. You know, and I think that if it comes with my approach on sort of their icing on that is resistance, but what's like underneath, like as baked in, is sort of this fear of doing the wrong thing, or it being overwhelming, or opening a can of worms that, you know, may make things a lot ultimately more difficult, you know, like whatever it is. And so trying to kind of pull that back so that then people can feel safe that, you know, our role is to help mitigate this and help feel comfortable progressing in whatever they are, whatever their need is. That's taken me a long time to learn, though, because I think I used to get kind of emotional or impassioned when somebody felt like they were being a jerk. And, you know, I would just get mad and, you know, go home and have imaginary conversations with myself about what I could have said and those kinds of things. And so, you know, that took a long time for me to kind of, okay, you know what? People are ultimately good people. There's something going on here. So.
And I feel like that speaks just to like having conversations like this and having conversations with students, faculty, and staff to show them that it is okay and that there are support networks and that we are an office of resource for everyone, right? To make everyone feel like they belong and that they can provide these supports to students as well.
Yeah, we can be the support of the students, but the only way for that to work is to work with everybody.
Right. And you typically only have to have that conversation once with that person, and then they kind of realize what's going on after that, usually. Yeah. And then you get maybe an ally after that. So
I know, that's the hope. Usually, right. Sometimes we really can. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, we don't really even have on here like a question around like success stories, but if we think about success stories, some of those were those occasions where maybe it was a very resistant faculty member to a student with a very specific need or something like that, and they felt like that's a whole extra thing for me to take on, like I don't even have time and all that kind of stuff. And by the end, you know, they're the one, you know, sharing to the next instructor, like, oh, it's actually fine. And the Disability Services Office has your back and they're going to help. And the student's really great. And, you know, and so like, that's sort of those success stories that we latch on to.
So I'm going to jump around a little bit, but if you had a magic wand, what would your ideal setup or offerings of disability services be?
Super broad. Go.
I just feel like we were talking about the other stuff, so I feel like we can answer this.
Yeah. Well, no, and I think my answer would probably be a really simple one: is that I work in another field. You know, really, that like the inclusion is already thought of. You know, I've thought about times where, you know, I've kind of utilized tools from other schools that have like really great checklists of kind of like, if you're going to have an event, like these are all the things that you should think of, you know, and that came from a disability office and then was put around a campus, and then I had stolen, kind of borrowed, and then trying to do some stuff here. But I think the ideal thing would be that instead of us being the phone call, that someone would just talk to a colleague next to them, you know, or go online, or that, you know, that teaching students with disabilities is not an extra elective that someone takes, but rather is baked into the curriculum. That when someone's hired as a professor, there are, you know, things through HR that people are learning about how to, you know, reach a wide variety of learning styles, you know, that we don't need to be here, that I can do something else and something different, you know? So that would really, my magic wand would be that like, there's just full inclusion there.
And so your other field would be like a professional food taster for like, like nice restaurants.
Yeah, I mean, I love to do that. I love, you know, I don't know. I don't even know what else I would do, because there's always the pull between like something that you like to do and something that would be a career. But yeah, I mean, the possibilities would be endless for me. But I know if I didn't have to be the go-to to answer those things, and it was just baked in, you know, that's my magic wand fantasy for sure.
That's yeah, kind of the inside joke with our field is we hope to work ourselves out of a job. So that's exactly it. So yeah, no, I echo that. If that's the ideal thing, is, you know, and it takes a lot of work and it takes time, but weaving that stuff in and making it a systemic kind of belief and knowledge base that, you know, students with disabilities are going to be in your class. They are going to be using every service on campus. We need to know how to serve them, and it shouldn't just be up to 4 people in an office. It should be up to the campus community as a whole. And yeah, so no, I completely agree with that.
So when there is no disability services, right? Because we have our magic wands and we made that change and everything's included.
And we're all millionaires who patented some kind of amazing idea.
Let's say you are in a different role somewhere else. What is something that you would take away with you and transition with you into a different position?
I think the thing I would take away is kind of learning how to speak up to say things that are uncomfortable sometimes that people don't necessarily want to hear. And kind of taking out of it that like I'm being a wet blanket or I'm being negative, but rather that like I'm trying to utilize my voice to help other people that maybe are afraid to speak up. So I think the easiest example of that would be like the use of a microphone, because a lot of people still, you know, really don't like it. You know, I don't think my voice is like super great to listen to either, but it's not about my comfort of my voice. It's about ensuring that everyone in the room can hear. You know, so there's definitely been times we've been in meetings, you know, where somebody's at the front of the room or they just yell out, you know, well, everyone can hear me, right? You know, and most people can, but it's also that assumption. And, you know, why fry your vocal cords when you can just use the microphones to amplify your voice so that everyone can hear you? And I think that that's something that, you know, sometimes it feels uncomfortable, or I feel like, and maybe this is, you know, being a woman, that it comes off as like quote unquote bitchy or something, you know, to kind of speak up and say those things and ask people to pause and use the microphone. You know, but I think that that's something that I would take away, is just remembering that, you know, I have a voice and I can use it, and I don't want to substitute for someone who is a part of that community, but how can I, you know, put myself sometimes in an uncomfortable position to question or ask for something so that, you know, someone else doesn't always have to be the person in the room doing it.
I feel like kind of like the opposite end of that as well is it's okay to be uncomfortable, because that has been a topic for us in our past podcasts of it's okay to feel uncomfortable. You may not know always what the right thing to do is, but you can always ask.
Yeah, and kind of going on that is you kind of have to remind yourself, I mean, at least I do, you know, before I got into this field, I knew very, very, very little about disabilities in general. Like, how does a blind student read their textbooks? I didn't know. And you don't know until someone teaches you. And I mean, that's just across the board with all kinds of disabilities. And just, you have to kind of remind yourself when you're working with somebody that this might be a brand new thing for them, that, you know, they don't have that knowledge base that you built up over the 10 years. And to kind of go along with that is the thing I would take away personally, if I moved on to another field or something, is just knowing that, you know, when I'm working here, I am very aware of a student's disabilities because we have all their documentation and backgrounds and we've talked with them about it specifically. But anywhere you go later on, you're going to be working with students with disabilities, and you just don't know what they're going through on their own day to day and what kind of things are going to be helpful. So being able to kind of keep that stuff in the back of your mind, and just always kind of consider it. If someone doesn't seem to be picking up on something as well, or is struggling more than other folks that you're working with, like maybe that's something that is worth exploring. Is there anything going on in the background that you could be doing differently to help that person with whatever kind of activities going on?
I think I would take with me that I really appreciate working in a field that is not stagnant and that is never boring. If people ask us like, what's a day like in your office? And I've never been able to answer that question, you know, a typical day. And so, you know, I would want to continue that, you know, and again, like I could, you know, continue to be an ally for disabilities and to be a voice of people who have a harder time, you know, speaking up for themselves. But I do think for me, I would want to take with me that, you know, the answer should never be like, that's how we've always done it. And that's just how it is, because we're humans and we're evolving, and the world is sometimes absolutely spinning around us in terms of change. And so, you know, just making sure that we're always revisiting things. You know, we've spent a lot of time like just looking back on forms that we have, and it may seem really tedious and boring, but we've come up with so much valuable stuff that's like, it just isn't like relevant anymore right now. And, you know, it was only 2 years ago maybe that, you know, it was. And so to kind of got to keep moving and keep informed and keep up with kind of what's going on.
I'd probably say for me, just it's okay to ask for help. I think that being vulnerable, kind of like what I said beforehand, but being vulnerable just on someone who is needing support, I think is just, I feel like being on both ends, having been on someone on the end of being accessing services and then being one to provide services, I think that I have learned that it's okay to ask for help when you need it.
And I don't think, like, on the vein of disability stigma that we're always kind of talking about, you know, I think that it is helpful for people if we just talk about it more. You know, when Lauren was saying that some of the students come here and they don't really have a handle on their disability, I mean, that might be a systemic thing that was going on where, you know, people didn't really want to talk to them about it, or didn't, you know, they felt like they might not be able to handle it, or they didn't want them to feel bad, or those kind of things. Whereas students who come with a really strong handle on their disability and their needs actually tend to, you know, have a little bit more of a wider open door for success, because they kind of know, you know, what works and what's best for them. And so, you know, I think that also comes from something that's cool that's happened with this podcast, is some of our guests have, without us knowing when we invited them, they have self-revealed disabilities of their own. And I think we need to have conversations like that, you know, and asking for help and asking for support, you know, like, I'm team have a therapist for life, you know, always have a therapist, always have a marriage therapist, you know, always have a family therapist, you know, and a lot of people are in the field I'm in and they are therapists, but they don't like feel like they need therapy. But I think that, like, you know, people need to take care of themselves and to get whatever supports they need to be their best version of themselves. And so, you know, I think that can help with stigma a lot too, and help with people not having shame around stuff. We just should be talking about it.
So we have to wrap up because our work does go on, unfortunately. Boo, I had an extra question I wanted to ask, but it's okay. So our final question.
Limit us to like 10 seconds. We can do it.
Yes, 10 seconds. Our final question is, what is the takeaway from this conversation? And has anything changed about the way you feel as either a person with a disability or an ally about disability stigma? And the last part is, what is your favorite food dish? Okay.
Oh my gosh. I would say, taking away from this conversation, you know, we don't often get to pause and talk about kind of where we came from and where we want to go. So that's always helpful to just reflect back on that as an office, because we don't get to do that as a team. I forgot one of the questions that you asked, so I'm going to skip over it. And then, because I go right to food, as we all know, my favorite dish I can't answer, but I would say my favorite part of the world would be South America, Caribbean. I love spice, I love flavor, I love sauces. So that's what I would go with.
Brandon, 10 seconds. Takeaway, anything changed?
The takeaway is definitely, it's been nice hearing more about folks' background. It's you know, we've worked each other for years and years and years, and I've learned some new things. So that was really nice. And oh God, dish on the spot. I mean, it's gonna be boring, but good chicken wings.
Gluten, Brandon, gluten.
Anything with gluten. Yes. No, thank you. Anything with gluten. That'll be my answer. So, yep. I have some dietary restrictions at home, so I get gluten when I can.
Awesome. Well, in the essence of time, thank you all so much for being a part of today's podcast. We really, really appreciate it. A round of applause.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, guys. All right.